Hello, Romantics. I'm Sarah Gomez, author, romance lover, and host. You're listening to Romancing the Story, a podcast centered around writing, reading, and story structure, all with a twist of romance. We are at episode 73, and on today's episode, I speak with award-winning narrator and owner of Home Cooked Books, Karen White, about the ever-changing audiobook market, reaching your ear listeners, and determining the right time to release an audiobook. Karen is an author and actress who has spent 2 decades and going in the audiobook industry and continues with Home Cooked Books, a community created to share the love of audiobooks, both helping authors get the word out about new books in audio and helping readers find their next listen. In this episode, Karen and I chat how shifts in a career can lead to new opportunities, leveraging influencers and narrators for promos, and we even chat about the rise of AI in the audiobook industry. Links to connect to Karen, as well as other media mentions, will be listed in the episode description. She has also provided links to the Home Cooked Books Facebook group, a listeners page with superfan news signups, and an author FAQ. If you are an author with an audiobook or an avid audiobook lover, be sure to check out the links. I'm starting a new segment at the end of each episode to tie into the topic of the discussion. Let's tentatively call it Sarah's Stories. Did you know that I produced audiobooks before I became a podcast host? Stay tuned after the show to hear more. With that said, let's jump right in. Welcome, owner of Home Cooked Books, narrator, and audiobook advocate, Karen White. Yay!
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So do you actually do like Karen White under a Home Cooked Books part and then kind of Karen Gray is the author?
Correct.
Oh, okay. So
and I was a narrator as Karen White.
Oh, okay. Man, you have had so many careers. That is incredible.
And you don't even know the half of them.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I just seem to know the audiobook portion. So that is incredible. So in case listeners don't know, can you tell them a little bit about yourself and your business and all these names you're under?
Sure. Well, so I was a professional actress for much of my career, which of course then meant I did everything from cater waitering to working backstage in the theater. And I taught acting. So I did that for a long time. And then right around when I got married, I learned about audiobooks. And so I knew that having kids was going to be tough working as an actress, but this was an acting job where you had a little bit more control over your schedule. So I looked into it and I kind of wormed my way into narrating audiobooks starting in 1999. And I did that for about 21 years. And during that time, I was really involved with organizing the work because when I started, only people working in New York for major publishers were able to work under a what was then an AFTRA contract, and those of us working anywhere else in the country had to work non-union. And so I was part of a small group of us that worked with union staff to organize the industry over about 5 or 8 years. And at the same time, I was really active with the Audiobook Publishers Association, working on the public events committee and the PR and events committee. So I learned a lot from those who were professional marketers, but I was able also to give them the narrator point of view. So when I decided to change hats yet again and write books, first of all, I couldn't use the name Karen White because there was an established writer in women's fiction named Karen White already. And every editor and agent I talked to said, nope, got to choose a different name. So my child suggested Karen Beige, which I thought was funny, but not a great brand. So I literally went to the paint store and looked at all these different other words for white to try to be playful about it. But in the end, I liked gray, Grey, because it was just off and sounded a little sort of more sexy than white. So I became Karen Gray as an author, and then in 2020. And then in late 2021, early 2022, I actually retired from narrating audiobooks, but couldn't leave it behind. So I started my audiobook marketing and consulting company called Home Cooked Books.
What genres does Home Cooked Books do you kind of work with specifically at Home Cooked Books?
We primarily work with authors writing primarily in romance. My influencers are interested in cozy mysteries and some in fantasy. But we are mostly word of mouth, so almost all of my books have been romance. I did do a memoir, and like I said, my influencers are very game to try almost anything, but I really feel like we cover pretty much all the romance subgenres, from monster to mafia to romantic comedy to fantasy. But I would say we can get you the most bang for your buck in a romance subgenre.
See, and that's always, I love people who do that, who kind of like just kind of shift careers just a little bit, because they feel like, you know what, I've done this for a while. I've loved it. It's amazing, but I kind of want to, it's a different season of life right now. And I kind of want to make that shift.
Exactly. And to be honest, part of it was mental. I just felt like I had done everything I wanted to do as a narrator, but part of it was literally a different season in life. Not to overshare, but I went through menopause and my voice changed. And this is not doesn't happen to a lot of people, but it was, and I'm sure most people wouldn't even notice, but for me as a performer, it was driving me crazy. I just didn't have the range I used to have. And um, I just got tired of fighting with it. So I wanted to, like I said, stay involved in the industry, but it was just time for me to let go of being a performer.
That's so interesting too. I kind of work a little bit with audiobook producers and narrators as well, because there's a lot of overlap there with the podcast kind of
Yeah.
format. And that's something that I've heard too, that a lot of times as you age, your voice kind of changes. And so, like, there's a different market. Sometimes you shift to a different market because of that. And even pregnancy apparently can have effect on your voice. Not all the time, but a lot of times it can. So it's just very fascinating to realize, like, your instrument that you depend on for like your job, as there's other factors playing into that you don't even think about.
Yeah, hormones are strong actors in our bodies. They do things that I'm sure no one understands.
Very true. Very true. And I know, like, kind of, you mentioned you had an amazing career kind of behind the mic as a narrator. I know you've won awards too. That's incredible. This long, lustrous career. And you served as an advocate for the audiobook industry, right? On SAG-AFTRA chair.
Yep. I after we sort of as part of the organizing of the industry, we beefed up the audiobook steering committee. Every kind of acting job has a steering committee of members that works with staff to sort of advocate for the specifics of our the needs of our part of the industry. But also, we literally had to approve um, every contract that the in the audiobook realm that the union engaged with. We would give our seal of approval, and then the National Board of Directors, we would recommend that they sign the contract. We didn't sign it, but it was, if we didn't recommend it, it basically didn't happen. So it was a good way to sort of ensure that all the work we'd done organizing kept narrators in the driver's seat as much as possible.
narrators are so important, I think, to bringing, just like actors, to bringing those pieces of our media to life, to really bringing those books to life. And, sometimes it's ever shifting, especially now in the creative industry. And you kind of shifted. We talked about changing the season of life when you said now you're on the other side of audiobooks. So what kind of inspired you to specifically to go into audiobook marketing? Like it's a little bit of a different view of audiobooks, but still within that same framework.
Well, it was a combination of two things. One, when I was a narrator, when I started in the industry, a very few books would actually be made into audiobooks. A very small percentage of the books that were published would also be published in audio. And that's because it's expensive. It's much more expensive than it is to create an ebook or a print book. And because of the way our society is, I don't have percentages exactly, but by far the majority of books that were being published in audio were written by men, white men of a certain age. And so compared to the men who I started with, there were many fewer opportunities for me to narrate. So because of that, I started doing a lot of other things. I directed other narrators. I basically did all the jobs. But as I wanted to grow my career as a narrator, I realized I need to offer other things to make myself rise above the crowd. So really early on, I learned about social media. I learned how to promote myself on social media, how to get engaged in the community, the early community of book bloggers. It was basically back then book bloggers and book Twitter and a little bit of Facebook. And to the point that then I started getting asked by the APA, the Audiobook Publishers Association, and by writers groups to speak on social media and audiobooks, whether it was for narrators to how to raise their own profiles, or for authors and how to use narrators as a way to market their audiobooks, or just to highlight their audiobooks as opposed to their ebooks and print books. And I got really into the blogging community every year. Every year, the Audiobook Publishers Association conference would be at the same time as Book Expo. And a lot of bloggers would come to that. So I would create these meetups between bloggers and narrators when we were all in New York or whatever the city was, so that we could have, in-person contact, again, to raise the profiles of narrators. So with all of that, I started building all these relationships. Then when I published my own books, I had a steep learning curve in terms of marketing the ebooks, but I already had an in with these bloggers, most of whom had by that point were migrating to Instagram and other places. Or I had reviewers who were fans of mine, who followed me they were audiobook fans of mine, and they followed me to my own writing. And as I was learning from other authors, I realized many people didn't have those contacts, and they didn't know that there were different things you could do and should do to market your audiobooks. So in an author group, when I was getting ready to retire, I said, hey, would anybody want help marketing their audiobooks? And people were like, yes, please. So I really just started it as a pay as you can, let's just see what works thing for about 6 months. And it was working. And I had this community of reviewers and influencers. So we just have been going now for 2 years, and it's growing like wildfire.
Gosh, that is so smart. I love how you just really saw kind of the need in the market, but also kind of made yourself. My husband, who's an economist, likes to say anti-fragile. It's like a term they use in that field of like you did a little bit of everything, right? So you didn't necessarily have all the narration jobs you wanted. So you made yourself like valuable by learning other skills and then putting them to use, and then kind of coalesced into kind of the path you're on now, which is incredible. And you are so, like, I love the fact that you immediately saw, especially being as a narrator, and I'm sure you knew that being on that side, on the other side of the mic, how I see so many people who are loyal fan bases of like certain narrators. Like it is wild to see, especially like I'm in the romance community specifically, but I see so many people saying like, oh my gosh, I love this narrator. I'm going to listen to their audiobook, no matter what it is. I can listen to them read a menu and I'm good.
Yeah, it is a well-documented fact that audiobook listeners will follow narrators to not only to new authors, but as you said, to genres that they don't normally listen to. And in romance subgenres, even, it can be a powerful way for authors to leverage that narrator into finding new readers who might not read them in print or eyeball read them, as I call it.
That's something, yes, I have seen, and that I feel like can be leveraged, especially if we're looking to like promote an audiobook. That might be something to think about when you're looking at a narrator and or, considering them.
I definitely always say that choosing your narrator is your first marketing decision, because you want to be really thoughtful about, do you need, like, are you really great on TikTok? Then maybe you don't need to pay extra for a narrator who is active on TikTok, or vice versa. Maybe you want someone who's really active on TikTok, but is not yet a recognizable name. There are just all these different factors that you can take into consideration, that to find someone that will mirror or balance what you're already good at in terms of marketing, and or come with their own audience, and or maybe a section of audience that you want to appeal to.
Yes, because that is something I am seeing too, as far as like that's something I didn't consider. But yes, but narrators are building their own audiences on a lot of the social platforms. I see a lot of people follow them. I'll even dip into somebody's live when they're reading a book, right? For their, oh, look, I'm narrating this book. I'm going to give you guys a live reading as I kind of fix up some of the problems. And I'm just like along for the ride. And it's just really insightful and really interesting. And it's a great way to build an audience. As you said, audiobooks are like the fastest growing segment of the publishing industry. I think it has been for a pretty long while now. And kind of with the rapid advancement of the technology, it is more accessible than ever. I've heard of several narrators who pop up booths when they're on vacation to like get in a couple of extra, like to do pickups and things like that. So your company, Home Cooked Books, caters to both authors looking to market an audiobook and readers looking for audiobooks. How do you assist authors in building that audience for their audiobooks?
So we talked about using narrators to connect to new readers. That's a big one. Mm-hmm. Another thing I do when I consult with authors on their marketing is look at everything they're already doing and see where they're neglecting to highlight the fact that they have audiobooks. A lot of times, if you look at a website, the people will have their books listed and the books are in audio, but you would not know it by looking at the website. Or maybe they do have links to audiobooks, but they don't have a little clip embedded on their website, which would give someone who's checking out their website a little taste of what that narration would sound like, which is, I mean, I don't think I know a listener who would buy a book by an unknown author and or narrator without listening to a clip of the audio first. And then maybe even doing a deep dive and looking at reviews of other books that narrator has done, because they don't want to get stuck listening to somebody for 8 to 10 hours who they don't like the sound of their voice. It's a very personal experience. You know, those people are in your ears for extended period of time. And it's not just the sound of their voice, but the level of performance that they're bringing. And every single listener has a slightly different preference. Every book has a different demand. And so you want to make sure that you're letting your potential listeners know what they're getting in for. So everywhere you can, you want to have those clips. You want to have them in your YouTube. You want to have them in your social media posts, all those things where you can make sure that you highlight that your audiobooks exist at all. The other thing I do is I have a stable, I guess, a collection of book influencers and dedicated reviewers that will sign on to review advanced listening copies and then help spread the word about the book. And I am really picky with the people that I allow to be in that group of influencers / reviewers, because I want to know that they are going to give that book an articulate and fair review, that they're going to talk about it as an audiobook, not just as a story, but we're going to hear why they should listen to it in audio. And then I also really try to cultivate people who are going to create content on social media to talk about what they loved about this book.
Something that always, as an avid audiobook listener, I've helped produce a couple of audiobooks. That is something that always gets me, is like, I don't know that things are in audiobooks until like way later, like after I've already purchased the book, or I just happen to notice, oh, this is actually an audio too. And I would have loved to have listened to it in audio, but I just don't see it anywhere on maybe the author's platform or anywhere listed, and no one calls it out. So those are just, I think, so easy kind of wins for us as authors or narrators, and that, hey, I did this book, you may want to go check it out. And it's just, those are things that I feel like are super easy, and I wish I could see of more. And I love that you have been so specific about who you kind of have in your kind of your collective, your menagerie of like, book, like book reviewer, audiobook reviewers, because I am kind of the same way. And I always relate it back to like that 1,000 fans theory of like, you can have 1,000,000 fans, but they're just kind of wishy-washy fans. Or you can have 1,000 like super fans. And that's always what I'm looking to create too, is like the super fans, the people who just love your stuff and will tell the world. And just like, that's always what I encourage authors. Like, don't be discouraged by numbers necessarily. You want the fans, you want the people who love your stuff and will just shout it from the rooftops and tell, like, just to have that word of mouth and tell their friends all about it. When you have like those influencers, do you have them like in different platforms?
Yes, most of them are on at least 2 platforms. I have a growing number. Most are on Instagram. Honestly, I left Twitter behind when it became what it is now. I focus on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok right now, and then my influencers are on one or all 3 of those, 1 or 2 or all 3. There are Storygraph people are starting to also look at, and then for review platforms, there's of course Goodreads and BookBub. It's an ever-changing landscape, but right now the big 3 socials are those.
And you kind of touched upon strategies of kind of like how you look at promotions, kind of what you offer authors, kind of what we can look at as if we're looking to promote an audiobook. Can we kind of mention everything's kind of always shifting around as far as like socials and, new websites, new ways to promote? Are you seeing anything strategies that have been effective in the past that are just feel like now outdated? Like, I wonder about blogs. Do people still use blogs? Do you still utilize blogs?
I started out as a blogger, but I think I have 2 or 3, maybe, certainly less than 10 people who are still reviewing on a blog. Almost everyone that used to be blogging has now migrated to Instagram. I think Instagram is really the primary one, and then they'll repost in other places. And they're using Goodreads and BookBub as another place to keep track of their reading and connect to other readers. But blogs have really, they're kind of gone. That's the big change that I've seen over the past 15 years. Recently, I think the big change, well, obviously there's Book Talk, which is just a wild west, and that changes every 15 minutes. So it's a thing where if you want to be there, you got to be there. And but at the same time, what I tell authors is, even if it's not a landscape you want to be active in as a creator, it is a good idea to have have a location there so other people can tag you if they are creating content. That, I think, is the sort of the base you have to hit on TikTok and on really any social. I recommend having the same tag, the same handle on everyone so everyone can remember it. With, like, for instance, I'm Karen Gray, author, and Home Cooked Books promos, so that it's the same, and so that wherever the content creators are creating things, they can just tag you, because that's, I think, the big change right now that we're heading into, is that organic content has become so much more valuable. There was a bridge, and what I came into, actually, when I published my own books, where these promo companies that I based my business model on, essentially these book promo companies, which started with blog tours, which started with bookstore tours, right? So, the traditional publisher would send an author out on a tour, literal tour around the country to all these different bookstores. And so indie authors and publishers adopted that model to create blog tours, where you would appear in a different blog or two blogs maybe every day over the course of a couple of weeks around your release. And then that evolved into promo blast days, where the idea was that it would be a short thing, it would be an image and a little bit of text, and it would be everywhere. You would use these influencers just to amplify this one message that would be everywhere in one day. So people are thinking, "Oh my God, I just keep hearing about this book. It's everywhere. I'm gonna check it out." That was kind of the idea. Now we are getting into this era where the platforms themselves are more and more and more favoring organic content. And I get it. I mean, what that does is keep the bots from just replaying everything, in a meaningless way. So what we're having to do now is provide content for our influencers to use, but ask them to alter it in just a little bit. Whether it's put it in a new frame, or move things around, or create your own using the book's cover. That is so much more valuable than a whole, like 10 people doing that is, I think, more valuable than 100 people posting the same thing. And because what happens too is, for their account sort of loses its credibility in the eyes of Meta or TikTok. So that's the new thing. And it's a little bit intimidating for some influencers who were just used to saying, "Okay, I'll take what you give me and I'll put it on my feed." Now we're asking them to add a little bit. And the really creative ones are going whole hog with that, creating edits, which are collages of the books, almost a visual review of the book, or little videos. So, I mean, I could talk about this for days, obviously. It's a fascinating world. And I think that's why I love this book promotion community so much, is that they're up for it for the most part. They love books and they want to talk about books, and they want to talk to their friends about books. And it's just a lovely online community, which so many online communities are not. You have your bad actors in the book community as well, but I think for the most part, it's a lovely place.
The reviewers are very passionate. I love watching, what they can come up with and things that they integrate into like a review or just their content. Sometimes I don't even realize I'm on a reel on Instagram, and I don't realize it's a review until later on. And I'm just like, oh, they're reviewing a book. And so it just feels just interesting. I'm just interested in the way that they're framing it and they're presenting it to me. So I'm just like really invested until they say, like, "Are you interested in all this stuff? Look, there's a book actually that this is all based on." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna have to check that book out because you really sold me on that."
Yeah. And I think, what's also interesting, and I've talked to some content creators about this, is all of the creators I work with, the influencers, are volunteers. So they are doing this for their own love of the book. They're getting the review copy for free, and that is it. There are more and more influencers, content creators who have a platform larger perhaps than many authors have, who are being paid by authors to promote their books. And there's controversy around it, but at the same time, authors paying me to promote their books. I do have parameters around the books that I'll promote, primarily that they are professionally published, and that they're in a genre that I think my people would be interested in. I get it. I mean, I get that if you have done a lot of work to create this platform, you are bringing value to the table, and you should be paid for your time. And I think as long as, when you review a book that you got for free, you have to say that. That's the law. And I think when content creators do the same, if they're being paid to promote the book, then as long as they say it at some point, then I think it's cool, and people should be paid for their time in one way or another.
Totally fair, especially for the work they put in. And I know a couple of content creators who will sometimes like put links and stuff in there, and they get a small commission from that. And
Right.
sometimes that's how they can get a little bit off of their time and their effort. One thing you did call out, I will kind of lean back into just a little bit, is I think that is so important. That is, even if you don't want to be on a platform, creating a handle and creating your account, even if you have like just one thing on there, or it's just a placeholder for now, maybe just an intro video or something. The reason I say that is we came across that with my latest guest. Excuse me. Her name's Kimberly Packard. She just joined TikTok like a couple of months ago, and she was tagged for her book that just released this week by a reviewer. We had no clue, but she got tagged in it and she noticed it. And she was like, and it kind of helped her sales. So it was one of those things that we would have never known if that reviewer hadn't gone the extra mile, really found Kim and tagged her in that review, and that kind of new release coming out this week. So I think that is incredibly smart, and I got to go create my TikTok now because I forgot about it. But awesome. Just that is such a smart thing, because I know a lot of authors are resilient to join certain platforms, and that's fair. But like you said, if it's just a placeholder, just saying like, hey, not very active on here, but here's my account. If you're interested, and maybe even link it onto like some other platform that you're usually, or tell the audience, I'm usually more active over here if you want to go check me out over here. So trends tend to ebb and flow in the audiobook community. But I know that for my podcast in particular, I kind of mentioned this earlier, I run about 40 to 60 minutes. It's kind of what my audience enjoys. It's kind of something that comes like natural for me when I'm talking to my guest. So it works for everybody. But I know that audio format has really changed in the last like 10 years, pretty drastically, even the last 5 years. Do you see people gravitating more towards shorter or longer form audiobooks?
Well, what is interesting, and this is where I'm going to show my age, is that, because as I said, I started doing this in 1999. And when I first tried to get into doing audiobooks, the only place that I could get to answer my phone calls was a company in Beverly Hills that all they did was abridged books narrated by celebrities. So back in that time, many, many audiobooks were abridged. So you'd take a book that, if it were unabridged, would be your sort of typical 8 to 10 hours, and it would sort of like the Reader's Digest of audiobooks, where you'd squish that book down to 2 or 3 hours by just cutting out entire plot points. And it must have killed the authors to have this done, because it's really more like a taste of the book or an idea of the book. So that's where we started. But when Audible came along, and books were now not just being made on a hard copy that was expensive to mail, that was expensive to buy. I mean, an audiobook would cost nothing less than $75 a piece back in the day, when before digital audiobooks came around. When Audible came and changed all that by making it possible to download audiobooks onto a device and listen to them. Their model was the subscription model from the very beginning. So you pay a certain amount per month and you get a certain number of audiobooks per month. So what that then what readers wanted were longer books, because if I'm going to use my credit on a book, I want it to be a 14-hour book, not a 4-hour book, right? So I'm getting more bang for my buck. So I think that's where the longer audiobook, the value of a longer audiobook came from. But the thing is, every story is not 14 hours long, right? And many authors like to write. There are many authors who only do really short fiction, but many authors, myself included, will write books that are 70 to 80,000 words in length, typically novel length, but also every once in a while do a little novella, just as a bridge between series or as a little Christmas story, things like that. And the subscription model at Audible makes that makes it hard to sell. The combination of other audiobook companies or retailers growing that offer things a la carte and at lower prices, I think make the short audiobooks much more attractive. But the other thing many authors do, indie authors as well, is offer those short audiobooks as a newsletter magnet. So a way to get you to sign up for their newsletter or a special bonus just for their newsletter subscribers. So there's a lot of different ways that those shorter little taste audiobooks have become more popular and more reasonable to buy. But just to circle back, I think one of the reasons why shorter fiction has become of interest is because of podcasts. So we have a lot of podcasts can be an entry-level drug for audiobooks. So people who came in because they started listening in their car to podcasts or on their walk to podcasts, they are more primed for short fiction versus people who came in as eyeball readers and shifted into being ear readers. They probably want the full long novel experience.
Right. And that was actually part of a question that I asked my brain trust of authors of like, okay, if I could ask anything of this audiobook marketing, what would it be? And that was something that they had noticed as well. So like specifically, it was asked by a lady who has several novellas, and that's what she was considering doing, consolidating them all into one, and or possibly giving one as like you said, kind of a teaser or a magnet of some sort, of like a reader magnet of join my newsletter, and you get a free audiobook. It's something that I think that can be leveraged as a promotional tool. It's just that what works for maybe our brand and or our audience the best. But yes, podcast has really changed quite a bit of the audiobook listening, I think, experience. And I see that quite often of like, now I'm seeing like I see a lot of people do short snippets of stories in audio podcast format. So it's very interesting how it's kind of shifted in different ways. So
one note I would offer to authors who are wondering about short fiction is this, whether or not they're union, but definitely if they're union, there is a minimum amount that you have to pay an audiobook narrator to engage them. So it's one finished hour. So if you've got something really short, or if you are thinking of if you have a bonus epilogue that or bonus material that you offer your newsletter subscribers that you've thought about putting into audio, what you want to do is tack that on to a larger project. For instance, I have a novella as Karen Gray that is very short, and it is from the point of view of 5 different characters, each of whom are a major character, the main character in one of 4 of my novels. So to create that audiobook, what I did was, over the course of 2 years, as say book 1 was recorded, I would have the female narrator, who also appears in the novella, record her chapters in the novella. And then same in book 2, the male narrator, who is also in the novella, would record his 3 chapters in the novella. So it took me until I recorded all 4 of the novels before I had that novella finished. But it would have cost me 5 times as much if I had hired those narrators to just record the chapters in the novella ahead of time. So it was worth waiting for to save that money. So you definitely want to make sure that if you're going to record something very short, when you hire a narrator, that you have them pony it, add it on to a larger project. So you're not paying for that hour minimum and not using the whole hour.
That kind of suggestion quite a bit, especially if you, like you said, kind of you do have that shorter format. If it's part of a larger project, like it's tacked on into a series or it's part of, it's a companion piece of some sort, then that's a really great idea, is to maybe hold off possibly and wait for a bigger project. Because that's something too I've seen kind of debated within the some of the authors, because some authors will say like, well, I want to wait to put it in audiobook till I have the full series finished, because I want to pick one author in particular. Or other authors who say, well, I know it's part of a series, but I want it out in audiobook, like with the same time as the release. Do you have any suggestions for those authors looking to do either or? Because I know there's pros and cons to both.
Right. Because audiobooks are so expensive to produce, I think it does. I mean, there is value to a simultaneous release if you already have an audience in audio, right? So maybe an audiobook publisher has picked up some of your other books and those have done well. So if you're going to, say, publish an audiobook in a new series on your own, that you have an audience in audiobook listeners already. If you're just starting out, I personally would recommend waiting until you have a full series that is selling well. Because even though you will have a whole new group of listeners in audio, and additionally, you may have listeners who have eyeball read it who will also buy the audiobook, if the series isn't working, you're not going to know that until these books have been out for a while, or if until that you've got sell-through from book 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. I would not make that investment until you know that. And as an author, I know it takes time to figure out how to position yourself in the market, how to sell your books, how to write. Writing to market can be sort of a controversial item. But if you're not writing to market, you need to understand the market enough to put yourself out there in a way that you'll find the readers who are going to be interested in your books. And until you've done that, you don't want to make that big investment in audio. So I think a simultaneous release is great once you're established. Once you've got your rhythm, your publishing schedule, what's reasonable. Because the other thing is, to publish a simultaneous release, you've got to get on a narrator's schedule months in advance. And they are going to need that. They're going to need 6 to 8 weeks to record that book and for it to be ready to upload to Audible. And then you've got a minimum of 2 weeks before that book can release. So there are a lot of moving pieces when you're trying to do a simultaneous ebook and audiobook release. So you've got to be willing to either plan way ahead and or meet all your deadlines and put everything behind that big marketing push and be ready with the next books in the series so you can take advantage of it.
Because then you might have some super fans who are very interested of when that next book might come out. So,
right.
And something, of course, I think is really important to ask about, just because I would love to get, being a narrator, having this, like we talked about, this career and like both behind the mic and now kind of out in the marketing portion of the audiobook industry. There is a lot of talk of AI and kind of how it's shifting the industry and what kind of, what is ethical, what isn't, kind of like a lot of like up in the air pieces right now and what the precedent will be set. I did an episode using AI ethically, but both me and my guest did agree that creatives need to be compensated. So it was more of a, if you're going to use AI as a brainstorm tool, that's how we kind of presented it, less as doing the actual creative work. We want to do the creative work. Have you seen or heard anything about AI narration becoming more prominent in the audiobook space?
Unfortunately, yes.
Oh,
To me, the biggest problem with AI right now, and this is, I know attorneys who are involved in this. I mean, personally, my sister-in-law's brother is an attorney in this space. There is no law. There is no established law yet. So we don't know what using AI in the creative process does to your copyright. We don't know what fair use is in terms of whether it's an AI company using your content to train its machines in machine learning. And we don't know what is fair use in terms of using a narrator's voice for the same purpose. The union has worked really hard to put boundaries around that, but it's a game of whack-a-mole. I mean, the AI companies are moving fast and they are growing fast. So it's hard. It's a really, there's a lot of questions around what voices were used and how they were used to create the AI voices that we have doing audiobook narration, whether they were used fairly or not. So if you're getting into that, you don't know whose work has been stolen. It's likely that it has been, that it at the very least was used without permission. So that's one big part of it. Unfortunately, the retailers are pushing it. Apple, Google, Spotify, they are really pushing, hey, we've got this. It'll be really cheap for you to make an audiobook. And so a lot of authors who can't afford to create an audiobook are going that way. There is pushback from listeners who feel like it's a money grab to do that. But I think there are, unfortunately, for those of us in this business, listeners who aren't discerning enough to care. A whole other side is there are readers who, because of being differently abled, are not able to read with their eyes and maybe don't have the money to spend on as many audiobooks as they'd like to listen to. There are resources out there of humans recording for people whose eyesight is compromised, but not as many as books as would be available otherwise. So, for instance, I did hear of one author who paid a company to use AI voices to record her books and then only put them on YouTube to be listened to for free. So that seems like a reasonable compromise. Bottom line, artistically, I don't care how good these AI voices sound. It's not possible for them to ever create a performance that is live, that it lives, that has not just real emotion, but goes on an emotional journey that is present with the words. And same with writing. I mean, you could create something that sort of makes sense, that perhaps lays out good arguments, that is logical, but I don't think you can rip people's hearts out. I don't think you can make people fall in love. I don't think you can make people laugh and cry. I mean, in little tiny moments maybe, but not in the arc that fiction creates, that takes us on. I'm very wary about AI, and I'm sad that it's being used so sort of rapaciously, but I'm not worried that narrators will be completely replaced, because I got to tell you, so it is possible to record at least chunks of a book and not know what the heck you just said. I have done it. I have worked as a director and heard it, in which case both when I was recording myself or I was directing someone else, you can hear that they are no longer present, that they are doing the equivalent of driving home on a familiar route without having, how when you drive and you suddenly realize, I have no memory of what I just did. My body just did it on autopilot. Well, you can do the same. You can read all the words in the right order, but not be there. And I could hear it as a director. I could feel it as I could stop and realize, I don't know what I just did with that paragraph as a narrator. And I know that listeners can feel that too. When you lose interest in an audiobook, when you get distracted, when you don't know what is going on, it is likely because for a paragraph or two, the narrator was not present. And it is hard to stay present for, 4 or 5 hours a day in the booth? But that's the job. And I think that's what makes it a uniquely human actor's performance that can't be replicated.
I always enjoy too when narrators will read a sentence sometimes. And sometimes I assume there was one emotion behind it, and they give me a totally different emotion that makes more sense. Like you said, takes me on a journey and feels right for what is being said. It feels right within the context of what is happening in a scene. And my brain went somewhere else. And I was just like, oh, but that is so much better. And I don't think that's something AI could ever replicate. So that is something I thought was, I'm hearing more and more about. And like you said, I know readers are taking kind of a stance against it, and saying like, no, I don't want to listen to that, or it does sound artificial to me. Like for me, maybe it's because I've been doing podcasting for a while, maybe because I helped audio produce books. But there's some weird artificialness to it, to the voice. Like you said, like something about the emotion feels off. There's no emotion really. And something feels very equivalent to like just day in, day out, clocking in, clocking out, just very, you're disengaged from the material.
There's no thought.
Yes.
I mean, and this is also why I think it's important that we understand that a narration is an acting job. Mm-hmm. And it's an acting job that you have to train to do, because what you learn to do as an actor is to think in the moment as the character, as if you don't know what's going to happen next. That's the skill that you develop as an actor. It's like when you're a little kid and you pretend and you really think that you are going to the moon when you're sitting in that cardboard box, right? So that's what actors relearn how to do with total commitment. And it's real thought. I am really thinking these thoughts as I am reading these words in the moment that they are going from one part of my brain to the other and out my mouth. It's to me like the difference between Diet Coke and real Coke. Like you said, there's an artificialness to it. And maybe you can get used to Diet Coke because you want that caffeine with the sweetness, and that's what works for you, but it doesn't taste like Coke.
And something I know you mentioned some readers are taking a stance and things like that. I have heard of, I kind of did a little bit of a deep dive, and I noticed that some promotional companies are actually saying that too. No AI narrated and or generated book material, like anything like that. We will not promote those. Is that something you're saying too, or you might take a stance on?
I've totally taken that stance.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Just being clear, because I think that's really important too. Like you said, some authors don't know what they don't know. So if they're like, oh, it's super accessible now, I want to put my book in audio format, and they look at AI narration, there are limitations to that. I want them to, I just want anyone to be aware that there are certain things you may want to consider before you go into that, if that's something you are considering.
Yeah.
So,
and it is clearly, the good thing is the retailers are clearly labeling that books are narrated by an artificial voice. Unfortunately, but readers are asking for this, but right now you can't filter for human narrated books on any retailers, as far as I know. But that's something that I hope people will continue to ask for, because, you don't want to accidentally buy a book, or you don't have to go through all these AI voices to find a book that is human narrated.
Absolutely. I didn't even know that they hadn't had the filtering function quite yet on there, because yeah, I'd hate to give my credit when I, listen to a book and I don't realize because I know I would catch on to it, because I do. I'm so like I listen very closely. I'm always invested like in an audiobook, a really good audiobook, and I feel like I would figure it out pretty quickly, and and I wouldn't mean that's not something I would mean to buy. So
Right.
that is, hopefully they can, if readers keep asking, they will eventually get that functionality as part of it as well, because that would be great. But I know we have talked all about, being very passionate about audiobooks and the marketing of them and kind of where the future might lead. Where can listeners find you and your business, and how can they connect with you?
So my marketing audiobook business is Home Cooked Books, and it's homecookedbooks.com. And on all the socials, I'm at Home Cooked Books Promos. And then I write romantic comedies, essentially, as Karen Gray, and that's KarenGrey. And I'm at KarenGray.com and at Karen Gray Author. And I've all my books are in audio, and they're also available in all the places. I'm also a committed, widely distributed author, so you can get my books in the libraries, and you can buy them at any retail outlet as well.
Thanks so much to Karen for joining the show. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. That way you're the first to hear new episodes when they drop. And if you get a chance, feel free to leave a review. It helps support the show and allows more opportunity to bring in all kinds of fantastic guests. For today's story, I thought it would be fun to share some of my previous projects prior to the podcast. At one point, I decided to start producing audiobooks. I actually did about 12 audiobooks several years ago with my friend C.A. Szarek. I helped find talented narrators, negotiate terms, along with editing and mixing the audiobooks. It was a really fun experience, but I found I wanted to use my voice as well as be behind the mic. So far, the podcast has been the best of both worlds, but I do have my eye on getting back into audiobooks. In the meantime, you can hear me in the credits listed as Sarah Hamilton in many of C.A. Zarek's audiobooks, including Collision Force, Sword's Call, and King of Hearts. Feel free to check them out in Audible or the link in the description. I do include Amazon affiliate links, so I get a small commission from any purchase, and it's always greatly appreciated. As always, stay safe, be well, and keep writing. Bye!